Sup, Shred Sexies. Welcome back to the guitar course, DTTF guitar course. On this particular occasion, the video is going to be a little bit different because music evolution, it's a bit of a slippery topic. So it kind of defies the whole canned sort of narrative, I guess. So, you know, it's more about evolving the mind. Remember, you have to be able to sync up the mind and the body to be a fully effective musician, because the brain controls the hands. And obviously, it's a feedback loop. You hear something, you interpret that information, and then you react to it by playing something on your instrument. That's basically how it works. So that's how you have to interpret the sort of lowest level chain of command. And so that means that there is a cerebral part to it. Now, listen, you can kind of act on autopilot and all the rest of that stuff, and it's okay. But you'll never hit your full potential and never really know what you can actually do on the instrument until you start to, categorize and break this information down so it can become usable to you, right? And therefore, once you do that, you can then start to reuse it and combine it with others, like 3 notes per string meshing up with the pentatonic scale, and then meshing up the pentatonic scale with chromaticism, or adding the flattened third, or adding the sharp 5. So you have all of these intricate options, but no real point of reference to be like, how do I use this? And that's because most people don't understand music evolution. They can't see this system evolving up to the next obvious potential and then be like, oh, that's where that comes from. So that all the information kind of falls into line in the proper order. There's not this big gap in the understanding. And they're like, well, that's kind of a gray area for me. And then this makes sense, right? So that's a problem. So that comes from the idea that you haven't developed your mind enough to be able to understand the concept of evolution, right? If I take this chromatic scale, the evolution here is essentially I'm moving from chaos to order, so I can pare it down to the diatonic scale, just 7 notes, which has a definitive structure and sequence of sounds that actually makes sense and is pleasing to the ear. That's why we have the major scale. So that's the first kind of real evolution that you actually see. You take it from a state of chaos, just 12 random notes that doesn't really make that much sense, to actually just 7 notes that make a lot of sense and you can do a lot with. The next one is obviously playing around with that scale. Stacking the notes on top of each other, getting triads or dominant 7 chords or arpeggios, I guess you could say, right? Then you can start messing with the sequence of notes. That'll give you the modes. Then you can start subtracting notes. That'll give you the pentatonic scale. Just the core essence of the scale that you are working with. That's an evolution of thought. You're like, this is the bare minimum I need. Then you can take that and be like, oh, I can introduce elements of the major scale back in with some chromaticism, and then boom, you got a whole new tool to work with, and you actually knew where it came from. Then you're like, okay, this chromaticism, it's a little random. What if I want to focus that more now on some of these more sort of established color tones that you get with the pentatonic scale to get the blues scale? You're like, well, what do I have to do to a major scale to get the blues scale? You're like, first thing I need to do is just take the major scale and move it down to just the essential 5 notes of the pentatonic scale. So now you have the Ionian positions, major pentatonic. I was going to say minor. Nice. Major pentatonic, right? And then what you're like, essentially you're going to be like, okay, and then I need to add the flattened 3. Boom. You do that. And you're like, where does that come from? Now here's where it becomes important. You're like, oh yeah, that comes from the Aeolian position when I convert the Aeolian mode into the melodic minor variant. And then when I relate that back to a major scale, I get a flattened 3rd. And that's where that note comes from. You love it. Okay? So basically that note is borrowed from the melodic minor sequence, built from the Aeolian mode. Now listen, with the melodic minor and stuff like that, it's more of a tool. It's an effect. right? So that's another evolution of thought. You're not like, oh, I can just play this scale whenever I want to, because really you can't. Your music will start sounding weird. And that's the kiss of death. You have to understand when and where to use it, right? There are limitations with respect to that particular scale. So at least at the beginning when you're just getting into it, okay, later on you can do whatever you want. Insert Alan Holdsworth, okay? Some people just are not from this earth. But the point being here is that you're starting to sync up these systems in a way that actually makes sense. You like the blues scale and the minor pentatonic, the melodic minor in relation to the major scale. These things all basically converge in this particular instance to sort of produce this one note. It's the same thing when you play the sharp 5 from the harmonic minor system. Now listen, the harmonic minor system basically overlays over top the diatonic system note for note, except for the sharp 5, obviously, which is the alteration. Same thing with the pentatonic scale. So those things, they all synergize together. Again, an evolution of thought where you're like, I can play any one of these scales and it'll always work out. Now, the question is, did you use the harmonic minor at the appropriate time to really make the best use of it? Or did you just throw it in there randomly because you're like, why not? Again, another evolution of thought. With respect to music, it's not just evolving the music ideas up. It's also evolving your thought process to be like, when should I use this? Be more selective, right? It's like cooking. You start off with a base recipe, you make it a few times. You're like, oh, I could make this better. And you start tweaking it a little bit until it really, hits the spot, I guess you could say. Well, you're doing the same thing with music. You keep tweaking these elements until you're like, yeah, that's the best representation of what I like to sound like when I'm playing the instrument or making music. So it's essential that you actually develop and cultivate this mindset. Like, it's an essential element to actually getting better overall at the instrument. And that's a major level misconception. I played guitar for 30 years and I hit the ceiling and I couldn't get any better because my mind was not fully developed to accept new information and be able to adapt the information I had in new ways. Okay? Adapt the information I already knew in new ways to new ideas so I could start to break out of this prison I'd built for myself where I just constantly focused on playing fast and instead worked on speed of mind so that I could connect the ideas together faster, but make more interesting music runs. And then when I did that, obviously that made a big, huge difference in my playing overall. And that's what you need to do too. And that comes from the understanding of music evolution. How to just take simple ideas and be like, oh, if I had this flat and third from the melodic minor sequence, I'm good to go. Like in this case, I'm going to add the flat and third, but when I'm doing it up here in the Phrygian position, I really like how it sounds when I add the sharp 5. So I'm just going to substitute that one in now. Instead of doing the one from the melodic minor, I'm going to sneak in this one here from the harmonic minor. You see, and you make your own set of rules. You're like, this is what sounds good to me. And so you evolve your own thinking up. You'd be like, this is what sounds best when I play. And you set your own rules, and then you basically start messing with those ideas so that you get the maximum impact and value from them. Not just playing the pentatonic scale. You're playing the mode, both as 3 notes per string as the classical method. You're doing some sort of exotic scale there. The melodic minor, the harmonic minor. You have all the arpeggios as far as triads are concerned. You have all the dominant 7 arpeggios. So you start to see all this information pile up. And of course, the last evolution of thought is you knowing when and where to use these things for maximum effect. That is the basics of music evolution. It's looking at a piece of information and rearranging its elements so it's much more useful to you. Like the way 3-in-1 works with respect to the pentatonic scale. When you watch Frank Gambale do it, there's no human on earth that could ever play those pentatonic scales using alternate picking as fast as he can play them using that sweeping technique. So the obvious is there. If you wanted to go like psycho ultra fast using a pentatonic scale, that's the way you got to go. So you have to evolve your thinking up to be like, I have to adapt over to this new technique in this particular instance so I can play this scale ultra fast. And of course, you're going to do it both ways. So win-win either way. And then choose when you're going to use one way and the other. Again, evolving your mind along with your practice sessions so that you're like, this is the best time to use this. Taking chances, like using the harmonic and melodic minor, finding opportunities to actually factor them in. And then, of course, sort of onto the side here, but still really important, finding ways to apply scales like the melodic minor in a sort of diatonic context. Finding how it synergizes, because you're going to find you can't just play it all over the place. It doesn't work like that, so you have to kind of come up with your own special rules and start to commit them to memory. So that's the final sort of, you know, whatever, place marker, because honestly, it's the furthest away from what you actually need to learn first. First is just understand how basic music theory can be applied to the fretboard and then evolve those ideas up from one string to 6 strings, from one system to the next, the pentatonic scales into 3 notes per string. Then evolving the pentatonic scales or the 3 notes per string stuff using either the melodic minor or the harmonic minor, or enhancing the pentatonic scale with the flattened third and the sharp 5 from those scale systems. You see what I mean? There's a whole bunch of stuff going on there, not just in relation to doing the one scale system, because obviously those can all be represented as 3 notes per string. But once you get over here to the pentatonic system, you might want to just add in this one note. You might want to add them both in. Who knows? But again, that's where the practice sort of discipline comes in, because you're like, okay, I'm going to start messing around with this. You put on one backing track, you're like G major, and you start playing the G major pentatonic. You're like, does it sound better when I use the flattened third here, or does it sound better when I use the sharp 5? And you start to experiment, and you finally nail down something that you're happy with. And that becomes the raw pool of notes you're going to draw from when you start doing improvisations. And you're just going to put them together in the appropriate sequence. The appropriate sequence, I almost got it. And then basically go from there. And that's, again, an evolution of your thought process. Now you're not just be like, oh, do this particular sound. Use this one. Now you're starting to manipulate it even more. You're like, okay, I'm going to take this arpeggio and I'm going to break the first little section down. Instead of 2 notes, I'm going to do a little enclosure. Done. So now you've expanded just that 2-note thing into like 2 separate elements, blew it up even more. Made it more sort of central to what it is that you're trying to say. And again, that's evolution. You're now taking just this thing that was 2, breaking it in half, and then building something here and building something over here and connecting them together. You've evolved this simpler idea into something more complex by using something called enclosures. Music evolution. Right. I think that about wraps up this video. So don't get lost in the weeds. Instead, think about what it is that you're doing and how you can actually apply new information or things that you already are doing, and you know this information. Try to relate it back to something else, like the major scale, like the melodic minor scale. Like a great exercise would be like, okay, I'm going to use this mixolydian position. I want to pair it up with something while I'm playing a D7 chord in the key of G major, where I can use the melodic minor that's going to sound nice for me to then move down to this mixolydian position and play the D7 mixolydian pentatonic. Or combine elements with it. Either or, doesn't matter. But there it is. You see what I'm saying? Once you start thinking like that, you've evolved your thought up to that level to be like, how do I marry these 2 elements up? The melodic minor and this mixolydian pentatonic position. And you start to figure it out for yourself. Everything else will fall into place in a matter of 1 year. I guarantee it. Now, listen, if you're not that skilled on the instrument right now, you need to reduce your expectations down to things that are more sort of feasible. But it doesn't really matter if you take it from the simplest stuff all the way up to the most complex. The underlying principle of evolving the idea and then evolving your thought process at the same time still remains. They're inextricably attached together. And if you don't actually develop this skill, you just run out of headroom and you hit the ceiling and you're done. You'll just stay where you're at. You'll play faster, you probably play cleaner and with more, but you'll just get bored of your playing and you'll quit. Seen it too many times. They're just like, it wasn't challenging anymore. It wasn't that they couldn't do it. Just like it's not challenging anymore. It just got boring. So you have to keep evolving how you challenge yourself by having new ideas, not making it more challenging physically, by forcing your mind to put more complex music ideas together, by evolving your thought process and then evolving your playing skills by actually being able to take these music concepts, the melodic minor, and make it work with something like the pentatonic scale in a diatonic setting. So there it is. You've evolved your thought process to the highest level. You can create a math statement, if you will. How do I marry up this melodic minor scale with the Mixolydian positions minor pentatonic over a D7 chord and then figure it out? And once you're there, that's it. You've hit musician level. And essentially nothing will stand in your way because you can figure out almost anything if you actually put your mind to it. That's the end of the video. Nails it. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate every single one of you. And I wish you all the best in these courses. We're going to look at triads next and their arrangement. We're going to use the keyboard. It's going to be a lot easier to see than the guitar. So, I'll see you on Thursday.